Well, welcome to the Sacred and Small podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jason Hill.
And I am another Jason Buckwalter.
That's not going to be confusing at all, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I think what we should suggest to our listeners, as few as they might be, if you hear something brilliant, just remember Jason
said it.
Jason said it, and that's probably going to be me, but just so you know, Jason said it. But this is the Sacred and Small podcast, conversations in small church liturgy and mission. We are both small church pastors in the beautiful and small state of Missouri. We are all also both doctoral students, Church of the Nazarene ordained elders. So Jason, we'll start with you. Tell us about yourself, your context, your program, what baseball team you root for.
That's good. We better get that out of the way.
This is, by the way, listeners, this is going to be a huge controversy between us because I am a huge Cardinals fan. I write about the Cardinals. And Jason Buckwalter pretends to be a Phillies fan, even though he lives in Missouri and goes to Cardinals games. Explain that one to me. I can't. I just can't.
Well, see, growing up in Southeast Pennsylvania, I mean, there are just certain things that are important.
Doesn't Paul say something about leaving your childish ways behind, though? I think I remember that in the Bible. I'm sure he's talking about baseball.
I'm embracing certain aspects of my childhood. Yeah, so I'm originally from Southeast Pennsylvania, Lancaster, Amish and Mennonite people. Those are my relatives. I'm sure that'll come up at some point too, because I think I've been shaped by Anabaptist theology in a lot of different ways. But somehow I found my way to the middle of the United States in Missouri. Spent a lot of time in St. Louis, about 10 years. Where the city of St. Louis brainwashed my children into becoming Cardinal fans.
It's part of the law there. It's part of the law.
I am regaining them, though. My middle child, who would always boo whenever I watch the Phillies or listen to them on the radio or whatever, has recently said, I will cheer for the Phillies as long as they're not playing for the Cardinals. So in my book, that is a complete win. I think it's a little easier now that we're in the middle of Missouri. We're in Fulton, which is like the definition of flyover country.
Right.
You have to want to come here or you get lost going between St. Louis and Kansas City.
Right.
It's a great little town, though. It's about 12,000 people. A lot of churches for the size, but our church is about 30-ish years old, and I am the third pastor of it, and I really like it here. It's a good place, and the church is great too.
Yeah, and this is kind of where some of our contrast, and we might share a name, but there's a lot about our situations and things that are diverse, and I think will enable us to bring some unique sort of aspects to this conversation. I grew up also in Missouri. Grew up as a Cardinals fan. Not that that's really relevant to our discussion today, but. Now pastoring in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, Cape Girardeau Church of the Nazarene, a church that has been here since the 1930s. And I'm not the third pastor of the church. I think at one point the pastor had the church had three pastors in the span of like 3 years back at the very beginning. But I've been here. You've been there for about 2 or 3 years, you said?
It'll be 3 years in December.
3 years in December.
Yeah.
I'm going on year 11 here in Cape Girardeau. Also a fairly small town, a little larger. Cape is the current population of Cape is probably around 35,000, and then we have a metro area that's a little bit larger. There's Jackson, Missouri, and Fruitland, and Scott City, and you don't care about the geography, but probably about 100,000 in our immediate vicinity. But it definitely feels like a rural. Small town environment, and we're about an hour and a half outside of St. Louis, which is the biggest metropolitan area near us. You're probably about 2 hours away from.
Yeah, we're depending on where you want to go in St. Louis, we're about an hour and a half west.
Yeah. So Fulton is west. In case you don't know Missouri, Fulton's west of St. Louis, Cape Girardeau, south of Missouri. and we're on the same district on the Church of the Nazarene, and we've been friends for several years. Actually, what we're doing today is the type of conversation we've been having for a long time, sort of personally and with other pastors on our district. And it seemed like a good time and the right opportunity for us to kind of take this public. And one thing that I'll say is that we are very serious about this being a conversation. And I think this has always been the way it's been between you and I, Jason, is that being pastors when you were in an urban environment and now in a rural environment, there's a lot of isolation in there. And it really, I think, and I don't know if you agree or disagree, I think it really helps to have people that you can talk to and engage with and converse with, not to be told what to do. We are not here in any way to tell you what you need to do. We're not experts on this. We are absolutely fellow strugglers with you in small church, small town environments. And so we just want to invite you to be a part of our conversation today.
Yeah, and I don't know how many times that I've had a problem or something and wanted to work through something and just have, verbal diarrhea all over the computer screen.
There's a visual. Can we get that up on the screen? Let's.
Yeah. And, you're like, man, I don't know what to tell you. And like, I think it's gone both ways. And so I think that'll probably come out in some of these conversations where, we're working through stuff in ministry, and it may be that, some of you have dealt with similar things. And so we're hoping to not only, have a rich conversation with each other, but to involve you in that as well.
Yeah. So the whole purpose, right? We're calling this Sacred and Small Conversations. We dealt with that part of it. Conversations in liturgy and in mission. And we're starting, and we felt like this was very important for us to do. We're starting with that term, sacred, right? Why, Jason, are we starting with that term, sacred?
Well, it's because it's the work of God. It is the work of the church. It's sacred. I kind of think all of it's sacred, but specifically the work that we engage in preaching the word and administering sacraments and, prayer for healing and comfort and all those kinds of things, gathering together to examine the scriptures. All of that is sacred work that we partake in together. And so if we don't have that aspect of it, a good handle on that, I don't think anything else falls in line after that.
Right. And it seems to me, and I could be wrong, and I'm certainly not, talking about anything specific, but it seems to me in a lot of these conversations on YouTube, on podcasts, on Apple Podcasts or wherever, we quickly go in the church to the practical. How do I do this? What's a technique that I could have to get this done? I've got a task I have to accomplish. I need the right tool. I need an expert that can tell me how to do this. And we kind of replace, I think, the sacredness of what we're doing with the practicality of needing to get it done. Yeah. And while it seems like we're going to deal with a lot of practical things here, but our intention is to address them first and foremost from that position of sacredness, that the work we are doing in the church is really a reflection of the mission of God, the liturgy that we've been called to as the work of people in response to the nature and character and the activity of God around us, both in our congregations, in our context, and in the greater part of his kingdom in our communities.
Yeah. One of the things I think that was so important for me, especially as a young pastor, was Eugene Peterson, actually. And I think in the midst of the pressing nature of all those practical things, he gave me permission to really reconnect with the sacred side of things.
Right.
And to just kind of soak and live in that and be filled by it, to be energized by it. So I think all you said was great. And I think that for me, at least personally, like Eugene Peterson has been huge.
Yeah. Because I don't know about you, Jason, but my age, I'm 42. I had to think about that. And when you get to this point, you have to think about it, right? I was educated. My theological education was probably at the peak of the church growth movement, right? And sacredness was a part of it, but let's be honest, it was it was about, you need to do these 5 or 6 things in order for you to have a healthy, growing church. And if your church isn't healthy and isn't growing and doesn't have these 5 or 6 things, then sacredness doesn't matter, because you're not going to be growing as a church, and that's all that mattered.
Well, and even to the point of, you've got to tone back your sacredness.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Right.
Or else you're going to alienate.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, boy, that was the heart of what we were learning there. One of the first things we did, part of a church plan in Tulsa, Oklahoma, before I came here, one of the first things me and the pastor did was we went up to Bill Hybels' church in Willow Creek in Chicago to learn how to be seeker sensitive, to basically learn how to be less sacred and more, I don't want to say secular, but
consumeristic.
You mean consumeristic? Yeah, but those weren't even terms. We weren't even using the term. I mean, people were, but we weren't even using the term consumeristic or materialistic or missional on the other side. That wasn't even a term that we were using at that point, at least in the early part of my education. And now it's fairly mainstream, fairly commonly used.
Yeah, I'm a little younger than you. I'm only 38, although last year I spent all year thinking I was 38 and I was only 37. So I don't know where I'm going to be when I'm your age.
That's the way this works, man.
It's only going to go
40. It's just
downhill from there.
Yeah, right.
I think I grew up in a context in a church that was largely that way. And I reacted against it. And I always had this hunger for something deeper and more, for that sacredness in church. And I was really blessed to be able to find that through my education and my internships at college. So
for me, what moved me was ministering to people directly. Like I was taught some way, sort of in an environment in seminary, and I was practicing that because I was involved in a church plan at the time. But then it was really digging down into people's lives and considering what the Great Commission is, to make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them. That's one part, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, right? And teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded. That, I mean, when we were, especially when I was involved so much in small group ministry and writing curriculum and doing things like that, teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded wasn't, we were just hoping that they would watch the video and answer a few questions and maybe sort of make sure they attended church the next week, shut the back door sort of concept. But as interacting with people and sort of realizing the relational nature of authentic discipleship and the way Jesus related to his own disciples, that really changed my understanding. And so I sort of flowed into compassionate ministry, and from there into a church that's centered around the ideas of relational discipleship, or relational compassionate ministry, and intentional discipleship. So I don't know, there's a little bit about my journey in a nutshell. We'll talk about our own context more. I think people will be interested in hearing our stories and also how these things have played out within the context of our own communities, because your environment, as we've learned, right, in these conversations, your environment in Fulton and my environment in Cape Girardeau, even though they're similar sized towns, similar sized communities in a similar part of the country, could not be more different.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Sacred and small. We'll get to that. Conversations. We talked about that in liturgy and mission.
Yeah.
And it seems like that word liturgy, that's one that we've dealt with a lot, and especially me, it's become part of my doctoral studies. It would have made me nervous back in that little guy a few years ago that was being educated in church growth stuff. The idea of liturgy, and I would immediately say, oh, Catholic, you guys must be Catholic. Or maybe you're Anglican, But that's not what we mean at all, is it?
No. Liturgy is so much more than just smells and bells, right?
Right. Yes.
as they might be like to say, but it's we've outlined two different ways to talk about this. So corporate liturgies are church services, those kind of more formal things, wedding and funerals, and individual liturgies, which are individual practices and habits that we do in response to what God has already done for us, in us, and hopefully through us. Right.
Because I want to make sure that this is clear, because since it was a new term to me, I've tried to be very precise in defining it. Liturgy is literally means the work of the people.
Yeah.
as opposed to the work of God, right? The work God is living and active, right? He's involved in this world. He's resurrected and ascended. He is Lord. Jesus is, right? And so his kingdom is, right? It is everywhere. It is all things. Everything is sacred, as we talked about before. So our response then is what we would call liturgy, the work of the people in response to the character and nature of God. And so whether you're a high church, Anglican church, a Catholic church, a Lutheran church, and you have a very specific liturgy that you follow out of the Book of the Common Prayer or some other, dictated thing, or whether you're, sort of a free-flowing, charismatic Pentecostal church that does everything by the flow of the Spirit, you actually have a liturgy that you are engaging with and enacting in response to who God is on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and for anybody who's not familiar with the Church of the Nazarene, so we're in a Wesleyan holiness tradition. We come out of the Methodist Church, but a very much low church. Well, not all Nazarene churches are the same.
There's some diversity. The Via Media, there's some diversity in our expression of liturgy.
Right. But by and large, not very liturgical in a way. A lot of people,
our roots are in tent meeting revivals is really where we derive from.
This is probably another conversation, but I think we're way more American revivalism than we are Wesleyan holiness. But,
absolutely, yeah.
So James K. Smith has some really great work on liturgies and talks about things like the mall as there's liturgies when you go to the mall, or specifically sports arenas. And if you've ever been to Cardinals opening day, have you ever been to Cardinals?
I haven't.
You haven't been? Oh, that's too bad.
I like my money in my bank account.
Well, I was very blessed when we were in St. Louis to have someone be like, "Hey, you want to come to opening day?" And I'm a fan of baseball, and it's not quite baseball heaven, but on opening day, it's pretty close.
Ooh.
And I know that's heresy.
It is, yes.
But just there's things, I've gone to like a couple, 2 or 3, and there's definitely a liturgy, and what's going to happen.
You know exactly when to stand, when to sit, when to cheer, when not to cheer, who to cheer.
What music's going to play? When those Clydesdales come out, it's going to be that song, and if I start humming it, it's going to be in my head for days. Yeah, right. Stop. But that's why if we are responding to the work that God has already done, that's why liturgy has to be both corporate and individual, I think.
Right. Because our own prayer life, our own study of the scripture, our own, honestly, just even the work that we do on a daily basis in our actual jobs, that is part of our individual liturgy in the sense, well, especially our prayers and things, that's pretty obvious, but our work could be a little, because it can be done in response to the character and nature of God. Now for us as pastors who maybe have full-time pastors, and I realize not all of our listeners might, I bet a lot of you are probably bivocational, which is becoming increasingly common amongst small town, small church situations that we're largely talking about. But even working in a secular environment, that can be done as a liturgy in response to who God is. I do this in faithfulness and in worship.
Yeah, and I think that just takes a little bit of intentionality, and for people to understand that and to know, like, okay, I'm going to the factory, and we've got a Dollar General distribution center in town. It's a big employer. Like, I'm going down there to work, and I'm going to throw boxes in a truck, and I'm going to be the presence of Christ among the other guys that I'm working with, and my work ethic is going to be part of my liturgy, my individual liturgy, my response to the gift of being able to work and being, Yeah.
And that's where mission comes in, right? I mean, this flow, there's almost no, I feel like if we, you and I, and then our listeners as well, but if we can get this, it would make a huge difference in the way that we view, well, let's just say the sacredness of everything, right? The sacredness of God's kingdom, because that work that we are doing in response to the character and nature of God, that is mission.
Yeah.
That's almost the very definition of mission. I think it's Alan Hirsch probably who says that God has a mission and that mission has a church, right? And so, and we are that church. We're engaging with God. We're learning about God. We're discovering God continually in the flow of his grace through the Spirit. We respond in accordance with that. And that, naturally would be a response in agreement with, or in coordination with, the mission that God has to the world.
Yeah. And I think it's important to stress too, that it's always a learning activity. Like we're every day, for pastors and lay people for sure too, we're learning what it is. We're learning to recognize what God is already doing in the areas we are.
Right.
And so then we got to ask the question, like, where is God working already? Where is God's mission already advancing? And then the second question is, how can I participate in that with intentionality and to move the mission forward?
As pastors in our offices or out in our community, as bivocational pastors who are working a secular job, as citizens in a community, as parents, as whatever it is, God's there. There's certain activities we can do in response, and there's a mission. There's a mission there. Do we have to clarify? Maybe we should briefly, that there's a difference between mission and missions, isn't there?
Well, I think especially in our denomination, we have little old ladies that love overseas missions,
right?
And they that's what they live and breathe. And not that
there's anything wrong with overseas missions,
right.
And
that's not that it's not God's mission in the world to go to Mexico to help build something, but that's not exactly what we're talking. I guess missions with an S is a subset of mission.
Right. And something you struck me, or something you said struck me, about being learners. And here we are, 30, whatever you said, 30, whatever youngness you are, and me, 40, whatever ridiculousness old I am.
You still have your hair, so.
Right. That's true. I do. Yes, especially if I lean forward, you can really see it there. If you're listening to this, which I would recommend instead of looking at us on video, Jason doesn't quite have as much up on top as I do. And I like to hold that over him. Get it? Over him? Anyway, bad jokes. You're going to get those a lot. But the whole idea of disciple, right? Go and make disciples, go and make learners. A disciple is a learning. And when we've taught discipleship all over the place in our district and whatever, but we will never stop. I don't even think on that side of heaven, we will never stop learning about the character and nature of God. And my argument would be, if we ever did stop, right, that would be the point where we are almost elevating ourselves up to the level of God, because he is always, no matter how close we are to him, and no matter how much access we have to who he is, right, in his very presence, or him filling us in where we are, right, there's always that much more for us to learn about who he is, what he's doing, and how that plays out to those around us.
Yeah. Just thinking about discipleship, and one of the images I preached on this a couple of months ago that really struck me, like a disciple is someone who sits down and like imitates his teacher, his or her teacher. If your teacher walks a certain way, you're going to walk that certain way, I mean, literally. And if you're going to pray a certain way, you're going to pray that way. And so I think that's something for us to model, with transparency, saying we're not always getting it right, but it's something for us to encourage our folks to as well.
Right. So liturgy and mission, completely interconnected. That as we learn about the character and nature of God, we begin to enact that character and nature through our own activities in our engagement with the rest of the world. Liturgy, mission, sacred, and small. So are we going to put this out there? Is there going to be like a limitation that churches of this size and over, you're banned, you can't be a part of this? How's this going to work now?
No, because I mean, little churches have been looking at big churches for a long time, and I'd be just as pleased if big churches look to little churches for help and understanding. And like, I feel like the small group movement is a reaction against being big, not against being big, but finding a way to have all of the benefits of maybe a smaller gathering without losing all of the benefits of having a large gathering.
And we've both been a part of large churches. In fact, we both are in the small environments that we are in now, coming out of larger environments. And I think that affects the way we look at these things.
Yeah. And I think I'm gladder.
Gladderness.
I'm happy to be in a smaller context.
Yeah.
So I worked with a guy that and this may be off topic, I don't know, but he always would say, if we could just grow a little bit more, then we could hire a staff.
Never ends. Yeah.
We could hire a staff person, and that staff person could take over the responsibilities of the things that I'm not particularly gifted to do.
Right.
The parts of God's mission that I don't want to do, the liturgy that I don't want to do, visiting people in the hospital or, whatever. And I think what that does is that takes away from us, from our responsibility then to train our folks to participate in liturgy and mission.
Right. And whereas in the small church, and this is where we say that a lot of the teaching, a lot that's out there on YouTube or some of these podcasts is coming from large church to small church.
Yeah.
And there's a major, loss of translation at some point. And I think a lot of this in regards to music and worship through song, that there's a certain set of equipment, there's a certain set of procedures, there's a certain set of quality of performer that you have to have in order for you to be able to do these things. But I don't know about you, in our context, sorry, we're stuck with 30-year-old sound systems and a half-blind piano player, and I literally did play with a mostly deaf guitar player for a while, but that's what we had, right?
Or a second grade drummer who's learning on the drum,
he's learning, right? Yeah.
And I think that lends to the realness of it. I think some of those things have become even more apparent as we've had to adapt technologically in the
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, how much money do I got to drop to make sure my live stream is watchable?
Right. And how much time do I need to invest, speaking of liturgy, how much of my time do I need to invest in getting our live stream or whatever we're doing on YouTube and Facebook and Spotify and TikTok? And I don't even know. I'm too old to know all the things that I'm supposed to be doing. And then also how wearing that can be. And I think that's the thing. When we get so, into the practice of church and the practicals of church, and we neglect in many ways the sacredness of the tasks that we're doing, it's pretty easy for us to get out of mission and into job. And I don't know, I find that to be the point where I start to lose the life of what I'm doing with God.
And it ceases to be life-giving and starts to be draining.
Right.
I think that part of that has to be us intentionally seeing some of those mundane tasks as part of the liturgy and mission. Like,
right.
I've got to make this email newsletter, and I don't want to do it. It's not life-giving. I'd much rather be doing anything else, but it is part of the mission.
And seeing those challenges that we have, like from, you mentioned a third grader who's learning the drums, or a guitar player who's just learning, or this or that. And we won't focus just on, the music part of ministry, although we're both involved in that, and that will come out in what we do. But seeing those as opportunities for discipleship, seeing those as opportunities for an individual, however talented or not talented, to express liturgically the character and nature of God and to respond to that. That's I don't know, that's powerful. That can be special, even if it doesn't fit with what we see on the radio, or hear on the radio, or see on the big YouTube channels.
Well, it allows us to be people filled with grace and to give grace. Right. And it allows our congregation to also extend that same kind of grace.
Right. And there we are.
I have not heard our drummer, he's been playing for maybe a year now, year and a half. I have not heard one complaint about, when he loses time, or he's working so hard, and like, that's an opportunity for him to feel like he's participating in the life of the church, and for us to be like, okay, he doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah. It's worship. It's and to be able to give and receive grace that way.
Right. So you don't have to be a part of a small church to be a part of this. We're not going to put any kind of limits on what a small church is or isn't. In some ways, that's kind of your call, but we are going to try to engage this from probably a 200 and under perspective. And probably more often it'll be even less than that, because 200s have a tendency to act and want to look bigger, whereas 50s, churches of 50 and smaller, when we've both been there, you know, they don't have those options. And we won't be the only ones in here. A lot of times it'll just be the two of us, but we're hoping over the course of, you know, weeks to invite some other pastors and some other leaders to be a part of our conversations here. And we would like to ask you to be a part of it as well. So wherever you are today, if you're watching us on YouTube, then there's a comment section there, or if you're listening on a podcast, you know, drop us a note, ask us some questions, say, hey, I would love to hear you guys talk about this, and you know, we'll try to work it in. This isn't going to be an every week thing. We're too busy to do that, but we're kind of hoping maybe we can put an episode out every few weeks here through the fall, moving up towards our Advent season, and we got a number of topics we're going to try to cover between now and then. But
yeah, we're going to try to stay current too,
yeah,
with what's happening in the world. So talk about Advent far enough in advance before Advent, so it's not the first Sunday of Advent, and we're talking about how to deal with, you know, Advent candle wreaths and not burning your church down. I don't know.
It's a big deal, right?
Yeah,
important part of it. Yeah. So you should be able to find us right here on YouTube, or if you're listening on the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Google Play or even Spotify, we're going to try to get this out there on a bi-weekly basis. If you liked it, hit the like button if you'd like to, and we would strongly encourage you to subscribe to our channels and share this among your friends and your family members and all your other pastors out there, and you know, try to help this conversation go beyond just two Jasons on two screens. So.
And if your name is Jason, we'd especially love to hear from you.
Yeah, we would. Let's really add as many Jasons as we can, make this as confusing as we possibly can make it. So, yeah. Sacred and Small, Conversations in Liturgy Mission. Jason, it was great to be with you today. Good first run, I think.
I think so. Hey, are we going to have like a catchphrase at the beginning or at the end? Is there something we should say to go out? You know, I don't know. It just seems like everybody has something, or is that's just too corny or cheesy? Or, you
know what? If something develops over time, I'm willing to embrace the cheesiness of that, but I'm not going to. Yeah, it's going to be organic. It's going to be, you know, an impromptu liturgy that we develop. Unless you have something. If you do,
no, I don't.
Yeah, but
go Phillies. I'm not.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Well, again, thanks for joining us, and we will see you in a few weeks. And may the grace and peace of our Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Oh, there we go. Maybe that's it. Maybe we just got it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah.